Hi, I'm Richard Parker, the founder and director of research at Rationale. My very special guest today is a legend in the dermatology community. She's a board certified dermatologist, but she's also a clinical associate professor of dermatology at NYU. I'm speaking, of course, of the wonderful Dr. Ellen Gendler. Ellen, thank you so much for joining
Thanks for having me, Richard.
You went to one of the finest medical schools in the world, Columbia University, so you could have chosen any medical specialty. What was it about dermatology that called to you and said, I want to be a dermatologist?
I'll be honest,
Yeah.
there was a dermatologist there when I was a medical student who was probably the smartest person I've ever met. And when people were in the ICU with crazy diseases and no one could figure out what they had, they always have a rash. And they would call him in and I was rotating and he would always know what this person had. And it made me decide, this is really, these are the people I want to be around. They're just the smartest people. And they know so much about medicine in general, not just skin.
Dermatology is a really interesting specialty because it's probably the one where you have to interface with your client's life most intensely. You know, with any other specialty, it's kind of set and forget in between visits. But with dermatology, the advice you give your patients is with them on a daily basis. That's a huge responsibility. Was that a driver for you becoming so interested in skincare? You're a world authority in skincare. Talk to me about your interest in skincare inside dermatology.
Well, I love the idea of derm being kind of a primary care specialty too, because we see children, we see adults, we see elderly people, we see sick people, healthy people, and I love that. I like being able to combine everything. I also like, at the time when I went into dermatology, it wasn't really like it is now. We didn't have so many options. There were very few things. And I found it really interesting to figure out why people were having reactions to certain things, why their skin wasn't doing well. Could it be from some of the things they were using? It intrigued me and it led me to explore contact dermatitis, which I studied at length while I was training.
And contact dermatitis, of course, is a condition that patients are very poor at knowing what's going on. You know, they sometimes think, oh, you know, what's causing this? But it's a direct immune response, isn't it, of the skin to a cosmetic that's being put on.
Well, there are immediate responses where you put something on and you're so irritated that your skin peels off or blisters, something like that. And then there's delayed responses where several days later you use something and then you get the reaction, kind of like a poison ivy type reaction. Takes some time to develop, right?
Could you talk to us about a medical concept that people, the public are not so familiar with, but a huge part of being a dermatologist is being an expert in what we call differential diagnosis. You know, to a patient, everything's red and itchy and painful, but you know, the problem-solving algorithms in dermatology are amongst the most complex in medicine. Can you talk to us about that and how important that is in your training and skill as a dermatologist?
It's extremely important. And honestly, it's the reason why many primary care providers or physicians make the same diagnoses for everyone if they have a rash. You know, they say, oh, must be a spider bite, must be reacting to your detergent. We look at things, the rashes that people come in with or the problems they come in with, and we analyze the color, the shape, the distribution. It's really fun and it's very challenging to the mind to try to draw up all the possibilities and then go backwards and ask the history. What were you exposed to? What did you do? What are your other concurrent medical problems? It's really the best field that there is in medicine. I'm convinced.
It is. What I love about dermatology and dermatologists is that, you know, it is a fiercely intellectual specialty in that you have, there's so much knowledge and analytical skill that you have to have. But then in the end, it becomes an intensely practical thing. What do I do with my skin every day? And the psychology of that must be fascinating because you have, I guess, a spectrum of patients from people who are highly motivated to do a lot with their skin every day, but then there are the patients that are basically lazy and don't want to do anything except swallow a pill.
Well, that's true, and I think it applies to all fields of medicine.
True.
If you were, say, a cardiologist, your whole focus would be how to keep your patient heart healthy. So for us, we deal with skin, and it's my job to, number one, find out what the patient is doing currently, assess his or her skin, and then figure out what could make it better or maintain the things that are already doing well.
Yes.
That's
and
exactly
it's often a complicated pathway, isn't it? Sometimes trial and error is involved, sometimes laboratory tests involved, sometimes medication to get the patient's condition. All three. So it's not a simple set and forget specialty.
It's not. But the other thing that I have found over the years of practice is that you need to assess your patient very quickly. So what I do, part of my intake form is to find out what the patient's been using. And I know that if we ask someone what are they using, what are they cleansing with, moisture, and if they list 2 products and it's Ivory soap and some other moisturizer, I know that if I give him or her 12 different things,
They're not gonna
it's
do it.
never gonna happen.
No.
So you have to really gauge your customer, gauge your patient, and
Yeah.
figure out, well, how are you going to best help that person
Yes.
to have the best skin possible.
So to try and find that shortest distance between 2 points for every
Correct.
patient.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. Could we give a practical example here? One condition that I see all the time that is universally handled poorly by non-dermatology physicians is seborrheic dermatitis, because
Yeah,
it
that's
looks
true.
like dry skin.
right.
It feels like dry skin. But if you put a patient with sebderm on a heavy moisturizer, which would
Make it worse.
it makes it worse. Can you talk to us a little bit about that as an example of how complex this all is?
Sure, because to the average person, flaky skin means dry skin,
Dry.
but that's not right.
No.
To a dermatologist,
No.
flaky skin usually means, or not usually, but often means irritated skin.
Yes.
And why would that skin be irritated? So you need to look at what the rash looks like, where it's located, and there are certain keys to someone who might have sebderm. For instance, their eyebrows are on here, their
Yeah.
scalp, their chest. Then you know that's sebderm. And invariably, these patients are using too much cream.
Yes.
They tell you, it's so dry, this is what I'm using. And then a light goes off in my head and I go, this is going to be pretty easy to try to, it's not so easy to convince them what I'm telling them, but I know what it is when I see that. And it's one of the most common things we see.
It's so common, and it's so frequently misdiagnosed by non-dermatologists.
All the
You
time.
know, another example that seems to be almost the ubiquitous use of steroids by non-dermatology physicians. So if something's red and sore and flaky, oh, here's some steroid cream. But as a dermatologist, you know that there's a dark side to steroid use
There's
too.
a big dark side. And also, there's not just one size fits all.
No.
So there are some steroid creams that are very mild and really will do no harm. They don't help a lot of things, but they
No.
will do no harm. There are others that are quite potent, can make certain conditions go away, but if used over long periods of time, can actually thin the skin. And unless the prescriber is specific about this, you can get into a lot of trouble.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Being a dermatologist is fascinating. I wanted to shift now to talk to you about some of your special areas of interest. You've mentioned contact dermatitis, which is a big one. And I guess, did that lead you into becoming interested in skincare and what your patients were actually putting on your skin?
Well, it did. But when I started in contact dermatitis, there really wasn't a huge array of skincare. It wasn't
No.
every Tom, Dick, and Harry didn't have its own line.
Yeah.
And we would see people with reactions, and the question was, what are they reacting to?
Yeah.
So we would do patch testing and figure it out. And as a result of being involved with that at NYU in the very well-known and world-renowned contact dermatitis clinic, and I also trained in London,
Yes.
I became involved in clinical trials with companies that were now developing more advanced skincare lines, and that's how my interest in this field developed.
When you started as a young dermatologist, what tools did you have in your arsenal to help people have healthier skin?
Well, we had cars, we didn't have that. We had the same, pretty much, well, maybe not all the same tools we have now, but we didn't have dermatoscopes, but we
No.
had, and we had very, very basic lasers at the time.
Yeah.
There were not that many, there was only one filler that was approved when I first started, and then I actually ran the clinical trial for the first HA filler that was approved. But things got more and more interesting and more involved, but as more and more dermatologists came out, the emphasis has become very different, and the people who are training now unfortunately seem to be less interested in the whole spectrum of dermatology and more interested in the cosmetic realm, and they get very little training in residency. So that's really a problem for me. It really is.
It's a huge thing. Are dermatologists today better trained in skincare and cosmetic formulation science?
No.
Well, I have colleagues who say things like, well, you know, we don't even know how psoriasis works, so why are we wasting time on trivia like this? To people who say, no, it's an everyday thing. We should know this stuff.
Right. Well, the problem is that psoriasis is a conundrum, and we should all know that.
Yeah.
But when your patients come in, what are they asking you about? You need to be able to take care of their skin concerns, and that's a big concern. And so those of us that are involved in this really press for programs to have more emphasis on this. There's a real pushback because it's not considered academic, and these training programs are academic. People have to pass their boards, and cosmetic science is not a part of the boards. So unfortunately, it takes years of experience and really effort.
Yes, and self-education.
Right, it's all a self-education. And if you're a perspicacious person and you could pick up on things, you learn. For instance, when I was very young, I started to notice people got what's called perioral dermatitis, this red rash around their mouth, and no one really knew what it was. We thought maybe it's kind of rosacea, but no one knew. And so every patient that came in, I would say, what are you using? And to try to find that common thread. And one of the things that I came up with way back then was that people were using tartar-controlled toothpaste, and this was a common problem. So I started to have them avoid that. Now, as you know, it's pretty tough now to avoid that.
Yeah.
But it turns
What was
out
the chemical that you
there
think
were
was
some pyrophosphates in certain of these tartar controls that are helpful with plaque that seem to be causing this problem. Also, with the emergence of electric toothbrushes, I found that was an issue because when people use an electric toothbrush, they're very messy. It's all, you know,
it's all over their face.
All over their face, and then the toothpaste all over around their mouth. So I started having people use special toothpaste that I would find that didn't have these ingredients, and also to go back to a regular old-fashioned toothbrush, and it seemed to work. And it was one of my little secret tricks that I loved. I loved finding that out, but that was only because I asked so many questions.
Yeah. So you have to have an inquiring mind, and I know a lot of what we term in Australia, we still have. I think a fairly big divide between medical dermatologists and cosmetic dermatologists. And to me, that seems to be an artificial barrier, because if a person walks in with rosacea, for example, is it a medical problem or is it a cosmetic problem? It's both. Nobody wants to have a red, inflamed face. Rosacea is another condition which is poorly understood outside the dermatology community, and we're making big breakthroughs inside the dermatology community with rosacea, but it's so common. So to know about what cosmetics, for example, are helpful or harmful with a condition like rosacea must take seeing thousands of patients.
It does, but that's really why there's a big problem also, because the information that's being promoted on social media is frequently by people who have hardly practiced and very, very little training in this. And they talk about products that they probably haven't even used. They're offered consulting or whatever to promote these products with no basis in fact for how they work.
So I want to turn back the clock now to 50, 60 years to someone who I know is a great role model and mentor for you, the late great Professor Albert Kligman.
Yeah,
so
I mean, he was a groundbreaker.
He really was.
And he laid the framework for what we do now. He was concerned about the health of the skin, also the appearance of the skin, and how to help us prevent the signs of aging.
But Professor Kligman is probably best known, along with his wife Lorraine, for their work in developing retinoic acid as a therapy that had both medical and cosmetic implications. Do you think retinoic acid, was our first cosmeceutical?
I do, 100%.
Yes.
That was our first cosmeceutical, and I think the second one was probably glycolic acid, maybe. Maybe salicylic acid. But I think glycolic acid was the newer breakthrough in over-the-counter cosmeceuticals.
For you, what defines a cosmeceutical versus a drug versus a cosmetic?
Ooh, that's really tough, because it falls into the same categories. Medical grade skincare, which to me means nothing. So a cosmeceutical, I think, to me, is something that does more than make you look pretty. It's something that is...
Is there a level of assumed biological activity there with a cosmeceutical?
I think there shouldn't be, but there probably is, because once you have biological activity, then you're no longer a cosmetic or cosmeceutical, you're a drug.
And I think of things like this.
Color cosmetics, I think, are not cosmeceuticals. And I think creams that have a purpose, that's what they mean by cosmeceutical. But it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm just trying to think of what it might mean to someone else.
But I think about things like a sunscreen. These things have biological activity. We're saying that they change your skin's immune responses to the sun, and yet they're relatively inert. Can we talk a little bit about, I want to talk to you about sunscreens, because I know this is one of the two passions of yours that we've discussed. Would you say a sunscreen is a non-negotiable for your patients?
It's a non-negotiable.
So if you want to be a Gendler patient, you've got to agree to use sunscreen.
And if you don't want to do it, you could listen to me and not do it, and I'll just yell at you and try to see you, because you can't fool me. I have eyes on all sides of my head. But in the U.S., sunscreens are treated like drugs. They have to be approved like that. So that's an interesting.
Yes, it is. And we spoke at an event last evening about the rigor that's now being applied. In the past, you could make a sunscreen in your kitchen and sell it. Now there's a level of rigor attached to making a sunscreen, which is equivalent to a prescription medication, and that's a good thing in my mind.
It's a great thing, but it's an expensive thing.
It's expensive and time-consuming.
Right, and I think that's part of the reason why in the U.S. we lag behind Europe and Asia in the products that we have available for sunscreens.
Yes.
It's unfortunate.
It's a block for consumers, to finding products that are cosmetically elegant. I know you've said some very kind things that you're interested in the rationale sunscreens and their technology and so on. But I also wanted to talk to you about your interest in sunscreen chemistry itself. To you, what constitutes a good sunscreen?
Well, a good sunscreen should shield you from all the light that
The
we
sun
know
generates.
about. That the sun generates, or as much of it as we have the ability to protect.
Yeah.
And the different wavelengths of light cause different problems.
Yeah.
So for instance, ultraviolet B is a sunburn ray.
Yeah.
And if you use any sunscreen that I can think of in the United States, unless you don't apply it well, most people don't sunburn if
No,
they keep applying it.
that's
They're good.
true.
But ultraviolet A is a huge problem.
Yeah.
It's one that we don't really pay enough attention to.
No.
And UVA is a deeper penetrating ray. It's what's in a tanning booth.
Yeah.
So if somebody goes into a tanning booth, gets tan, and they sit in there for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. If you sat in an ultraviolet B booth for 20 or 30 minutes, you'd be in the burn unit or the ICU.
Yeah.
So these are the light waves that we are really desperate to protect against better.
Yeah.
And then there's some other ones like visible light and infrared. Those are other players in the
and they have
arena.
some interesting implications for people with melasma, for example, or certain dermatoses that can result from visible light.
And
and
they're
so on.
less involved in skin cancer
No.
and probably in the aging process. They're less involved in ultraviolet A and B.
So is it fair to say that as our understanding of the effects of the sun, good, bad, and indifferent, the effects of the sun on the skin evolve? Sunscreens need to evolve to keep up with that.
For sure.
And it's a moving target,
Totally
we're
moving
trying to
target.
constantly. And on top of that, of course, we have to deal with, and this has been an obsession of mine my whole career, trying to create sunscreens that consumers love. Because, if people love something, they're going to use it more,
Well, that's what dermatologists motto.
Yeah.
The best sunscreen, when patients ask what's the best sunscreen, is the one you'll use.
Yeah.
And if you will only use one that's not great, well,
Yeah.
that's the best level of protection you're going to get, but at least use that.
Yes,
But
exactly.
there's so many self-deceptions with sunscreen. And
Can you talk to us about some of the misconceptions,
Sure.
the myths?
I often compare them to the concept of a fat-free muffin. My patients who say, well, I don't understand why I can't lose weight. I only eat fat-free muffins. And they say, well, it's 3,000 calories, but that's what they eat. So you can put sunscreen on. You're still going to get tan if you're not protecting yourself from ultraviolet A. And then there's the whole idea of the SPF 70 or 100 or whatever numbers they give that are completely deceptive.
Yes, they are. Yeah, they are. And as you say, it's about the quality of protection that you're getting.
And consumers don't know that SPF refers to UVB,
only.
and that's the burn ray. So
Yeah.
that's why you can tan with a high level
Are
SPF.
tanning booths legal in the because in
They
Australia
are.
they're illegal, they're
No,
banned.
Unfortunately, they're legal.
I can't believe that. That's so.
It's a business.
Yeah, true. But are the dermatology community unanimous in wanting to have these things stopped?
We try.
It's
Only so much you can do.
It's so difficult, isn't it? It's almost like smoking. You will never find a doctor today say smoking is good for you.
Never.
And so you'll never find a dermatologist saying tanning booths are good.
You won't, but you'll still find tanning booths.
Yes, you will. And what's interesting is that I've watched American dermatologists consult with skin cancer patients, and one of the first questions they ask is, do you use a tanning booth? Do you visit tanning booths regularly? So is it fair to say that is a almost a surefire path to increasing your chance of getting
I think
a
it
skin
probably
cancer?
is, but of
Wow.
course, there's a lot that goes into your chances of getting a skin cancer, your genetics, your
Yeah.
skin color, how much exposure over what number of years.
Your
But yeah,
health,
it's definitely,
all those things.
it's definitely.
So interesting. So sunscreens, to sum up again, are a non-negotiable for you. If
They
you want to
are.
have great skin, you've got to have a good sunscreen.
You do, but there's a whole range of issues with sunscreen and dermatologists. First of all, patients go into the drugstore. They go into Duane Reade, they go into Walgreens, they look, and there's
It's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming.
Yes.
Even I'm overwhelmed when I go in.
Yeah.
I start to say, let me just see what's available, and every year the rows
It's bigger.
It's bigger and bigger. I can't even navigate it. And
No.
then they change the color so that half of the products look the same. Each brand looks the same.
Uh-huh.
So it's very, very difficult,
Yeah.
and they have formulations creamy, invisible, dry,
sprays.
or you can't keep up. There's no possible way.
No.
So it's a really long conversation with patients.
Yes.
And it's
which you
tough.
often don't have time.
You don't always have the time.
No,
You really don't.
No,
Right.
but I mean, obviously, with your patients, you know, you have a big celebrity following, but you also have, you know, women who just want to look their best,
They do.
and so you can't avoid that conversation about selecting the sunscreen for your patient based on what you're looking for.
Well, what I try to do is I try to write things, put them on my website. I try to do this on social media. I try to talk about it and educate people. And I'm very impressed with the knowledge that many people have. They send me messages and I'm shocked. Like, really? You understand that? It's incredible when you give good information where people will glean from it.
Yes.
Unfortunately, though, there's so much bad information.
Yes.
And sadly, some of it comes from my own, you know, dermatologists.
Your own colleagues, yes.
It's
And
really
can we
wrong.
talk about social media as a tool for people, or I guess a source of information for people to find? You know, what's interesting is that you have a huge following on Instagram. So you have over 110,000 people following you on Instagram, and you're a busy New York City dermatologist with a thriving practice on the Upper East Side. Why would you dedicate your precious time to being on Instagram?
Well, I got started because I had back surgery and I had nothing to do.
Yeah.
And so I just started it was late in the middle of the night. I started scrolling and I thought, oh, this is interesting. And I was dealing with my sunscreen things and I just made a post or two about this. And next thing I know, it just went crazy. And then told me that there were people who really wanted this information.
Yes.
And for years, I was a little bit selfish. I didn't like to spread this information publicly. It was my little secret. And patients were always amazed when they came in like, oh my God, how come I never heard this before? And I liked that. Now I feel that I'm on the other side of my career where I've done this long enough.
You want everyone to
I want
know.
everyone to know because we're getting a bad reputation from the people on social media who are young, who are just sticking up for products that are ridiculous. It gives us a bad rep. It really does. And so I've changed my tune.
Well,
Now I feel
doctors
it's my job.
Doctors are one of the very, very last sources of trusted information. You know,
Sadly,
and it's a sacred calling, if you like, you know, to give public health information as a physician. And you know, of course, you do then open yourself up to crazy people, to angry people, to, you know, aggressive people, to desperate people. You know, have you experienced any of that
All of
side?
the above.
Oh, wow.
All of the above.
Yeah.
And
still you're committed
I don't
to
know,
doing this?
I am committed to doing it for as long as I can sustain it.
Who
My
is
husband
your-
thinks I'm nuts.
who
I
is your-
answer everybody. I don't know.
Who is, no, but that's a very precious gift that I think it's a public service.
I feel I'm doing a public service.
You
and
are.
I've actually made some friends. I've actually made some very nice
Well,
friends.
that's wonderful to
So
hear.
it doesn't get me lots of patients because frankly my followers are from all over the world.
Yes.
So they're not coming to my office, but
No.
I do some virtual consults. I've met some great
Wow.
people and I've had people come from other countries.
That's
It's
incredible.
super exciting.
Is there anything you can see in common with your followers? Do they tend to be mostly women? Are they medical professionals? Are they?
I think they're probably mostly women.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of young people, but that inspires me too because these are young people who are interested in learning.
Yeah.
And they know so much about the things out there. I don't know where they're getting their info. I assume it's from social
Online,
media.
yeah.
But when they say to me, what do you think about snail mucin? I'm thinking like, well, where did you read this crud?
Yeah.
But they get it somewhere
Yeah.
and it's our job to talk about it.
Yes, it's very hard, I think, as a dermatologist today to invest time in sorting out what's true science and what's pseudoscience. You know, cosmetic companies are getting very smart, especially the big ones, at doing studies and research that look legitimate. But you know, what constitutes to you a legitimate study or source of information about a product or an ingredient or a technology?
You know, I would say publications about it in a peer-reviewed
So
journal.
independent, objective studies.
Sponsored studies are not helpful to me.
No.
I don't find them helpful.
No.
But you know, back in the day, I used to run something at the annual American Academy of Dermatology meetings, and I called it the Beautiful Skin Consultation.
Yeah.
And it had a huge following. But it was in the days when you could actually have a selection of products that were available you could recommend. It was that finite. And I would talk about how I approach patients. It hasn't really changed. It's exactly what I did back then and I do now. And I feel that all of us, as part of our initial exam of a patient, other than if someone comes in, my mole is bleeding, can you tell me? And we don't have time to do this full thing, but part of a complete skin exam should 100% involve what are you using on your skin, and especially what type of sunscreen do you use? How do you examine someone for skin cancer and not discuss this in the same visit? Explain that to me.
I don't understand. It's like saying to an obese patient, what do you eat?
Right.
What is your,
How could you not? Right.
How could you not? And yet it's an absolute maze out there. So it's not an easy gig being a dermatologist today.
It's not, but when you mention the obesity thing, I don't know how many internists or primary care physicians really know how to speak to people about diet either, because they're not really trained in nutrition unless they have a special interest in it.
And isn't that analogous to what's happening with skincare with dermatologists?
Totally.
You can be a cardiologist or someone who's working with a primary care physician who works with obesity and not have any training in nutrition.
It's true, but many of them will have someone on their staff who is trained. And that's acceptable too. Why not have a trained nutritionist on your staff if that's what you want? That's great. I think in the dermatology world, many dermatologists have estheticians in their offices. It's a little different because there's no real degree. There are licenses, but the training is not particularly rigorous. And so for me as a dermatologist, I don't have an esthetician in my office, but others do. And if I did, it would have to be someone that I trained myself.
But your nurses, I found, because we visited your practice, your nurses are very well educated in care of the skin and triage and things like that. They really do have a very thorough understanding.
Well, I'm a stern taskmaster.
But they love you and they love you.
I'm not good with incompetence and with incompleteness, so I'm lucky that I have the most amazing staff, but they learn a lot and they know a lot.
They do. They're very impressive. It's a very impressive. I would call it a holistic dermatology practice and I mean holistic in the sense of you look at the whole person's needs. It's not just, well, I'm there to treat that spot and then see you later. It's like your whole skin matters to us.
Has to.
It really has to. So it's not something you do on a quick in and out basis. There is a lifelong relationship.
You like to hope.
Yeah,
it's not always like that.
Well, I mean, your reputation, your patients love you, and that can't be easy to achieve when it is such a time-consuming thing to spend time with your patients and then to try and inculcate the right habits in the patient for a lifetime.
Well, over the course of time, I decided that it was very stressful for me to make short visits. So I make my visits longer now, and then I don't feel so rushed. I don't run behind. I don't have to spend 5 minutes explaining why I'm late. I'm sorry. I don't. So I just book enough time for everyone, and it works much better for me and for them.
That's wonderful. I wanted finally to ask you about another area of special interest of yours, which is DNA repair enzymes. Can you explain to us what DNA repair enzymes are and why should they be in skincare?
It's a very interesting subject. So these are enzymes that are found not in humans but in plants, and they are known to help reverse the damage that's inflicted on our skin in the DNA when sun, or sometimes even just pollutants, are exposed to it.
So we all know that we all know what DNA is. What does the sun do to our DNA?
It causes things to mutate in our DNA. It causes the free radicals to form, and there are changes that happen in our DNA. There are
what do people see?
You wouldn't see anything. Sunburn is one thing.
So one thing. What's another example? Like what happens when DNA has errors in its replication? What are the implications for skin health?
Over time, it can do many things. It can cause many skin diseases. There are things that can be
including skin cancer.
Including skin cancer, right? And there are different DNA mutations in certain skin cancers that are classic, that are characteristic, I should say.
Yes.
But it's amazing to have something that when you put it on topically can actually act right then and there. Kind of like a stop sign, stop, and it does its job. And these were discovered, I'm going to say, in the late 1980s, not 1880, late 1980s. Took many years for them to be adopted, and there have been many good studies in reputable scientific journals about this. But dermatologists, by and large, don't really know much about it. It's incredible to me.
It is incredible because, from my understanding, from talking to you about it, these things are non-toxic. they don't have side effects,
Right.
and they are able to actually help in excising or removing those damaged portions of DNA and enacting the repair process. So if DNA is an evolutionary part of being human, why do we need more help if our body naturally does this DNA repair thing?
That's what evolution is. I mean, things change. You know, back
We're
in
outside more. Is
We're
that we're
outside
living
more.
longer?
Different things happen in
Yeah.
the environment that used to happen. You know, Adam and Eve, they didn't probably have the same problems.
No.
You know, they didn't live as long.
And even our grandparents, you know, their lifespans were shorter. So I guess you could say mathematically they did not spend as much time in the sun
Totally.
as people do today.
Totally.
So in other words, we have these DNA repair mechanisms in the body, but are they overwhelmed by the sun? Do they diminish with age? Or what?
All of the above.
Uh-huh.
And some people are deficient in certain ones and not in others. So one extreme example is a terrible disease called xeroderma pigmentosum. And that's a disease they call them midnight children. These kids are born without the ability to repair the damage that sunlight does to them. And so by the age of 8, they could have 200 skin cancers. You know, many of them die early. There's some other things associated. But when you see one of these children, what they look like, their faces are covered with freckles and
Wrinkles?
They get wrinkled, but it's very unusual to see a child with a full face of freckles, sun damage, and freckles or these pigmentation spots are our body's way of
Trying to protect
it, and you see what happens with these kids. So one of the ways I got interested in DNA repair was that I started working with these kids, working at the camp for these kids, volunteering with the XP Society, and we started bringing these enzymes to these kids. And then they'd come back the next summer, and their parents would say, "It's unbelievable. Do you know that Johnny? You know, last year he had 40 skin cancers or 40 pre-cancers, and this year he had 5." And that to me was just
huge proof.
And that's what got me incentivized to say, hey,
there's something in this.
Something in this, and these are extreme versions of all of us.
Yes.
Why did I get a skin cancer? I was in the sun as a kid a lot. I'm fair and light-eyed, and I got a skin cancer. And why did my brother not? Well, there must be something different about me. And maybe it's my ability to repair that kind of damage. So that's what got me interested, and it's been fabulous for me.
Isn't it fascinating how things that have very serious medical implications can teach us so much about everyday life? So that lesson taught you that, okay, I think there's something real in these DNA repair enzymes. Why hasn't the medical community as a whole, not just the dermatology community, embraced it?
Ooh, I don't know the answer to that.
A lack of studies, a lack of proof?
I mean, maybe a lack of studies, but there's so many studies about so many things. You'd have to be someone who wants to read about everything. The world of cancer has definitely embraced this. We know, we know that. But it's just a different world now. It really
and
is.
then applying, so assuming these things are applied topically in dermatology, they're not taken orally.
Well, there are other things you can
both.
take. You can't take the DNA repair enzymes orally, as we know yet, but there are things like nicotinamide you can take orally. And polypodium. There are other things that help prevent sun damage.
Skin cancer and sun damage. And so they're applied topically. If you had your way, would you want to see DNA repair enzymes in every skin product? Or where would you go?
Well, yes, I would.
Yes.
There are different enzymes. There's one that's activated by light.
Yes.
And to me, I don't see why every skincare product doesn't have that. It's expensive, and it's expensive to add, and it does add a cost. To a
But if the return is healthier,
to me it is
disease-free skin,
to me it is.
There's no downside.
That's how I feel.
Dr. Gila, thank you so very much for your time today. It was
Thank you for
wonderful
having
to talk. Thank you.